Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that nothing appears to have changed. The same flag still flies above government buildings. The same politicians dominate the evening news. The courts are open. Businesses continue to trade. Elections are still scheduled exactly as planned. From the outside, democracy looks perfectly healthy. But beneath that familiar surface, something fundamental has shifted. Not because anyone stole your right to vote, not because the constitution was rewritten overnight, not because soldiers marched through the streets. Instead, something far quieter has happened. Someone else's influence has grown while yours has quietly shrunk. History teaches us that power rarely announces its arrival. It doesn't always arrive wearing a military uniform or speaking from a palace balcony. More often, it arrives wearing a tailored suit, sitting in a boardroom, hidden behind legal agreements, investment portfolios, and institutions most people never think about. Real power doesn't always replace democracy. Sometimes it simply learns how to work around it. This is not a story about a secret organization controlling the world. Reality is far more complicated than conspiracy theories and far more fascinating. This is the story of how extraordinary wealth can gradually become extraordinary influence, how financial success can evolve into political leverage, and how the rules governing entire societies can slowly begin changing without most citizens ever noticing. Because the greatest transformations in history rarely happen all at once. They happen so gradually that people only recognize them after the world has already changed. For centuries, civilizations have wrestled with the same uncomfortable question: who really holds power? Is it the governments we elect, the institutions we build, the laws written inside our constitutions, or does lasting influence slowly accumulate wherever immense wealth accumulates? Political scientists have a word for systems where a relatively small group possesses disproportionate influence because of its economic power. They call it oligarchy. But before we go any further, we need to separate myth from reality. This is not an argument against success. Innovation has transformed civilization. Entrepreneurs have built industries. Scientists have extended human life. Investors have financed technologies that once seemed impossible. Prosperity itself is not the problem. The real question begins after prosperity reaches extraordinary scale. At what point does wealth stop being merely private property and start becoming public influence? That question becomes even more important when wealth is no longer used simply to buy homes, companies, or luxury, but to shape the systems that determine how wealth itself is created, protected, and transferred. History suggests this isn't a new phenomenon. It has happened before, again and again. Each generation gives it a different name. Each era dresses it in different clothes, but the pattern remains remarkably familiar. To understand why, we have to travel back more than half a century to an investigation that began with tax records and eventually raised questions far larger than taxation itself. The story doesn't really begin inside a parliament. It begins inside a filing cabinet. In the early 1970s, investigators working for the United States Internal Revenue Service began examining what appeared to be another routine collection of financial records. On paper, there was nothing particularly dramatic about the assignment. Governments audit taxpayers every day. Most investigations end quietly, buried beneath stacks of paperwork that never make headlines. But this one was different. The deeper investigators followed the money, the stranger the picture became. Fortunes weren't simply sitting in bank accounts. They were moving across borders, jurisdictions, and legal systems. companies appeared to own other companies. Trust controlled shell corporations. Shell corporations owned assets. Every time investigators believed they had reached the real honor, another legal entity appeared. It was like walking through a maze where every exit opened into another corridor. The question slowly changed. It was no longer has someone underpaid their taxes. It became who actually owns this wealth. That distinction mattered because taxation depends on something very simple. Governments need to know who owns what. Without ownership, accountability begins to disappear. Some investigators believed they were uncovering a structural weakness that reached far beyond tax collection. If extraordinary fortunes could legally move across borders faster than governments could trace them, then national tax authorities were beginning to play a completely different game from the people they were trying to regulate. History records that many of these investigations eventually lost momentum as priorities shifted within the agency. Scholars continue to debate exactly why, but the episode left behind a far more important question. What happens when wealth becomes so large that protecting it becomes an industry of its own? Most of us think of money as something that buys comfort, but beyond a certain point, money changes its purpose. It stops buying possessions. It starts buying protection. Imagine controlling a fortune worth tens of billions of dollars. A small change in tax law could cost hundreds of millions. At that level, hiring the world's best accountants, international tax lawyers, estate planners, trust managers, lobbyists, economists, and policy advisors isn't an expense. It is insurance. Some political economists describe this ecosystem as the wealth defense industry. Most of these professionals work entirely within the law. Businesses genuinely operate across multiple countries, and many financial structures serve legitimate purposes. The controversy begins elsewhere. Complexity itself becomes an advantage. Extraordinary wealth gains access to options unavailable to everyone else, and over time, those options become influence. Think of wealth like gravity. The larger it becomes, the more people, expertise, opportunity, and attention it quietly pulls toward itself. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because successful systems naturally attract more resources. Money attracts talent, talent creates opportunity, opportunity creates more wealth. Eventually, wealth begins shaping the very environment that allows it to grow. History has seen this cycle before, long before Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Another organization discovered that extraordinary economic power could become something much larger than business itself. 400 years before Silicon Valley, another organization quietly demonstrated what extraordinary wealth could become. Its name was the Dutch East India Company. At first glance, it looked like a business trading spices, silk, and tea. Over time, it became something unprecedented. It signed treaties with kings, established colonies, built forts, maintained private armies, and commanded naval fleets. In some regions, it exercised powers we normally associate with governments. History remembers it as one of the world's first multinational corporations. But perhaps its greatest lesson is this: economic power has always had the potential to become political power. Not through elections, but through influence. Centuries later, history repeats itself during America's Gilded Age. Railroads crossed continents, steel built skylines, oil transformed transportation. Visionary entrepreneurs such as John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Cornelius Vanderbilt accelerated industrial progress. Yet extraordinary success introduced a new question: what happens when one company becomes so successful that genuine competition begins disappearing? Governments eventually responded with antitrust laws, not to punish success but to preserve competition. Societies rarely fear wealth, they fear unchecked concentration because concentration changes incentives, negotiations, and eventually the rules themselves. Today, the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil or steel. It is information. Every search, every online purchase, every GPS route, every AI prompt, and every interaction generates data. Combined, those fragments creates an extraordinary map of human behavior. Training advanced AI requires immense computing power, specialized chips, billions of dollars of infrastructure, and exceptional talent. Only a relatively small number of organizations possess those resources. That doesn't automatically mean they control the future, but it raises an important question. When transformative technologies become concentrated in relatively few hands, how should democratic societies ensure that innovation remains accountable? History has a strange habit of hiding its biggest stories inside ordinary moments. In 2015, a journalist at the German newspaper received an encrypted message from someone they had never met. The message was remarkably simple. I have data. The source asked for only one thing: protection of their identity. What followed became one of the largest collaborative investigations in the history of journalism. Hundreds of reporters examined millions of confidential files from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. When the investigation was published in 2016, it became known as the Panama Papers. The documents connected politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and wealthy individuals across the world to offshore financial structures. But it is important to distinguish revelation from accusation. The Panama Papers did not prove that everyone named had broken the law. Offshore companies and trusts have many legitimate commercial uses. The deeper story was about opacity, how difficult it had become to determine who ultimately owned certain assets once layers of companies, trust, and jurisdictions were involved. That raises an important democratic question. If ownership becomes increasingly difficult to identify, how can accountability remain equally transparent? Financial privacy has legitimate purposes, but democratic societies also depend upon transparency. Finding the balance between those principles has become one of the defining governance challenges of our time. Money now moves across the world in milliseconds. Legislation does not. Democracies debate, courts deliberate, and parliaments negotiate for good reasons. But modern financial systems move faster than the institutions created to oversee them. This is no longer only a debate about taxation. It is a debate about governance itself. For centuries, wealth was measured in things you could touch: land, gold, factories, oil wells, and railroads. Today, much of the world's most valuable wealth exists as data. Every digital interaction contributes to systems capable of understanding patterns of human behavior at unprecedented scale. Whoever possesses that capability gains influence. This is why artificial intelligence represents more than another technological revolution. It represents a new concentration of capability. Only a relatively small number of organizations possess the infrastructure required to build frontier AI systems. History has seen similar moments before. Railroads, oil, and telecommunications each concentrated power in different eras. Today's strategic resource is computing power. Modern influence often depends less on physical assets and more on algorithms that determine what billions of people discover, purchase, and consume. These systems exist for many beneficial reasons, yet they also raise difficult governance questions. How should societies encourage innovation while ensuring accountability keeps pace? Regulate too little, and concentrated power may grow beyond meaningful oversight. Regulate too much, and innovation itself may slow. Finding that balance may become one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. Oligarchy is not created by technology alone. It emerges whenever any form of power becomes sufficiently concentrated without equally strong systems of accountability growing alongside it. History rarely offers perfect solutions. It offers patterns. Every civilization believes its institutions are durable. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that societies must continually adapt. How do we reward success without allowing success to become untouchable? How do we encourage innovation without allowing innovation to outpace accountability? And reasonable people disagree about the best path forward. That disagreement is not a weakness of democracy. It is one of its greatest strengths. Perhaps that is the real lesson hidden inside this documentary. Oligarchy is not simply about billionaires, one country, or one political ideology. It is a recurring question that follows every society capable of generating extraordinary wealth. Who holds influence, and who ensures that influence remains accountable? The answer belongs not only to governments, but also to independent institutions, investigative journalists, historians, responsible entrepreneurs, and informed citizens willing to ask difficult questions. Democracies are not protected by constitutions alone. They are protected by people who remain curious, who challenge assumptions, and who understand that accountability is what makes lasting progress possible. The future will not be determined solely by how much wealth humanity creates. It will also be determined by whether our institutions evolve as quickly as our technologies, whether transparency can keep pace with complexity, and whether accountability can keep pace with influence. Because every generation writes a chapter of history. Some inherit the rules, others redefine them. The question is, which generation will ours become? If this documentary challenged the way you think about wealth, influence, and democracy, share it with someone who enjoys asking difficult questions instead of accepting easy answers. If you are new to Stories That Matter, subscribe and turn on notifications for more documentaries exploring history, geopolitics, technology, economics, and the forces shaping our world. And now I would like to hear from you. Where do you think the right balance lies between rewarding innovation and preventing excessive concentration of power? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Until next time, remember this: history rarely whispers its lessons twice. The question is never whether power exists. The question is whether we recognize it before it quietly changes the world around us. I'm Manish Goswami, and these are the stories that matter.